Hey everybody, Gromos here with some more War Thunder Simulator battle footage. And this time I want to take a look at a few different and shorter fights from different battles, and in them I will be flying the F4F-4 Wildcat in the Midway event, as well as the P-40E and the Pearl Harbor event. Now those are not the greatest battles ever, but the P-40 was requested a while ago and I never got around to use it much and never had it in a video, and the F4F-4 I never had in a simulator battle video as well, only the -3. Also, those two events, Pearl Harbor as well as Midway, are certainly among the harder ones to win for the US side, so I figure a bit of footage from them might be interesting for that reason too. Now, as I've just said, those two events are certainly one of the less well-balanced ones in the roster at the moment, and need a bit of work on part of the US team to get something done. So let's start with a quick overview of the two events we have in this video. Midway was, back in the day, the first simulator event that I have ever played, and interestingly, I remember it to be more even back then, even though I was new to simulator battles and flying a Buffalo. One reason for that is certainly that back then there were also P-40s in the event, and now there are, as there should be, only Wildcats and Buffaloes. But I don't think that's the whole reason. I think the damage model changes that happened since then play a part as well. The damage models are, in the moment in general, quite a bit more forgiving than they have been in the past when I started playing simulator battles. It is nowadays, in my opinion, in general harder to shoot down a plane or inflict enough damage to force it out of the fight if you don't get a fire or a pilot kill, especially in lower tier matches of course. And having those more forgiving damage models that make it harder to inflict real damage to the target is something that, in my opinion, always has a negative impact on the side that needs to focus on quick hit and run strikes and not always has the time to get long bursts on target. Other than that, the Midway event is pretty straightforward. The US side gets Wildcats, both -3 and -4, and Brewster Buffaloes as fighters, and the Japanese of course get Zeros as fighters, and both sides get the usual dive and torpedo bombers. Now the US side in this event gets 4 more players though, and that is something that the US team really needs to exploit in this event to be successful. So let's talk real quick about the plane I fly in this event, before we take a look at 2 quick engagements in it. The F4F Wildcat was of course the standard fighter of the US Navy at this stage of the Pacific War, and we have 2 types of the plane in game, the -3 and the -4. The main difference between the two is the armament and the weight. The -3 has 4 50 caliber machine guns while the -4 has 6. Now, the newer -4 also comes with new folding wings, which in reality allowed carriers to carry a lot more fighters. In game of course that's not an advantage, and it does increase the weight of the plane, so the -4 is less maneuverable and less powerful than the earlier -3 versions. That is why I usually prefer the -3, but this time I wanted to mix it up a little bit and use the -4 instead. And the extra 2 guns also do help to get kills in fast hit and run attacks. It just increases the chance to hit the fuel tank or the pilot if you have more bullets in the air. Despite being heavier than the -3, the -4, thanks to its large wings, which are typical for carrier-borne fighters, still has a decently low wing loading, so it is still a decent turner, though it will also lose energy fast in turns. But turning versus Zeros is not recommended anyway. The good turn rate does help to line up shots though. Also, the Wildcat is a very stable gun platform, one of the most stable ones currently in the game, and this also helps with getting your shots on target, especially in combination with the nice gun sight you get on Navy fighters. Now, the competition for the Wildcat in this event is of course the A6M2 and at this point one has to say there are very few advantages the Wildcat has over the Zero. The Zero of course turns better, it climbs better, and it is a little bit faster. The Wildcat can dive away from a Zero if it has enough altitude, but since the Wildcat is not as great a diver than later US planes, the difference is not that huge, so you need some altitude to get enough of an advantage in the dive to really get away, since the Zero is faster and can catch back up in level flight after you level out. Sadly, the fighting in this event, and in War Thunder in general, usually takes place at lower altitude, especially later in the match, so you won't always have the altitude required to reliably dive away from a Zero. Now, the Wildcat can also take a bit more damage than a Zero, but this is again often countered by the Zero's cannon armament, which does more damage. So overall, when flying a Wildcat versus a Zero, you are often in a situation where you have very few real advantages to use. So you want to, if at all possible, have an energy advantage when entering a fight versus a Zero and stick with energy efficient vertical maneuvers. as a 1 vs 1 fight in a Wildcat versus a Zero at the same energy level will most likely not go well. However, possibly the best way to defeat the Zero in the Wildcat is not to enter a 1 vs 1 fight in the first place. You do have a slight numbers advantage in the Midway event, and this is also something you should try to exploit. The easiest way to kill a Zero is to shoot it off the tail of another Wildcat, so this is something to keep in mind when starting this event. You want to climb to get a bit above the fight if possible, but you can't waste too much time doing that, as you need to support your team as well. Because all the altitude in the world isn't going to help you if you're the last survivor versus 5 Zeros. The Wildcat simply doesn't have the energy retention to keep an energy advantage over multiple Zeros. Well then, let's take a look at a fight or two in the Wildcat over Midway. When I'm flying this event, I always climb a bit to the right to reach the island a bit from the side with as much altitude as possible to attack Zeros from above as they engage lower flying Wildcats. But again, I don't want to waste too much time doing that. I still want to reach the island in time to help my team. That means that Zeros still could be at the same or higher altitude than me, but I think that's a risk I just have to take if I don't want to play lone survivor in the end. Now, as I approached the islet, I could see some AA fire, and I moved that way hoping to find an enemy plane. And indeed, as I get closer, I could spot a Zero a bit lower and coming my way. Now, if I would have been a bit higher, I could have done a split S as he passed me to get behind him, but the height difference was not enough for that, so instead I pull up and come around in a looping to dive after the Zero as he passes below me to get behind him. He hasn't noticed my approach, so I can take my time to get a little bit closer and line up my shot carefully. I personally like to shoot from as close a distance as possible, and I get some good hits and the Zero catches fire and dives away, and I pull up and check my rear. I did hear another plane earlier, but all I can see for now is another Wildcat behind me. However, then I hear another plane pass me and the Wildcat opens fire on it. That is good for me as it helps me to spot the Zero, which thanks to the rather poor visibility to the rear of the Wildcat I might have missed otherwise. Now, I push my nose down to get away and go into a defensive spiral to present a more difficult target, while hopefully still making it somewhat easy for the second Wildcat to attack the Zero. And indeed, the Wildcat forces the Zero to break off and evade, so I can level out and go on the offensive again. With 2 vs 1 odds, we should have the upper hand. Now, the Zero climbs a bit, and since it has the better rate of climb than me, I don't want to try to climb after it. So I level out a bit and follow at lower altitude. But the Zero goes into a loop to attack again, so I pull up hoping I might get a shot from the front as the Zero comes past me. Since the Zero is quite a bit higher than me now, I have to pull up pretty steep to get a shot, but I have barely enough speed to do it and line up my nose with the flight path of the Zero and I can fire a burst. I get a few hits, but nothing big it seems. But after taking fire from both Wildcats, it seems the Zero has enough for now and disengages in a slight dive. Now, with the Zero being faster than me, I can't catch him if he keeps going, and I don't want to waste my altitude for no reason, so I level out a bit and follow at higher altitude. If the Zero decides to come around, I will have an altitude advantage. I see another plane to my left, and I turn that way in case it is an enemy plane, but it turns out to be another Wildcat, so I return to my previous course towards the island, as there seems to be a battle going on behind it. So this little fight was, in my opinion, also a bit of an example on how you want an engagement to happen in the Wildcat in this event, if at all possible. Attacking with an altitude advantage and having another Wildcat close by to get the Zero off your tail if you get into trouble. Of course, the best way to have that happen is if you fly in a squad, but that of course is not always a possibility. So after an initial climb at the start of a match, it is very beneficial to stay close to friendly planes, so you can support them and they can support you. Of course, that is always a good idea no matter what plane you fly or in what event, but if you are flying in a plane that is outperformed by its opponent in most criteria like in this event, it becomes more a necessity instead of just a good idea. Anyway, let's take a look at the rest of this battle. I approach the fleet behind the main island, where I expect a fight going on. With all the AA in the area, and after going a bit lower, I can spot the trademark orange traces of Japanese cannons. And as I take a closer look, I can see a Zero very low turning after a Wildcat, so I move that way to help out. Another Wildcat to my left is as well. As I get closer, the Zero is pulling up hard, and I try to get a shot at him as I pass, but I don't get quite enough lead to do so. So I keep going and pull back up again to regain some altitude and attack from above. the Zero dives back down behind me. The second Wildcat is on the Zero, but I don't have a good angle to attack, so I pull up in a loop and come around again to get a better angle for an attack. The Wildcat directly behind the Zero will most likely not be able to turn tight enough to get a shot, but it keeps the Zero turning and therefore low and slow. And when I come around this time I can line up the Zero nicely as it does a climbing turn, but I don't do too much damage it seems, so again I pull up and come around for another attack from above. Which is in my opinion the best way to get good shots, as it makes it harder for the target to turn out of your line of fire. Now the Zero turns to the right as I approach, but in this situation the Wildcat's turn rate is more than enough to get enough lead to fire, and this time I get a longer burst on target and the wing of the Zero flies off. Now I pull up to regain some altitude, but as I look back I can see some more orange tracers behind and below me, so I come around immediately to help out whoever is under attack. I expect the Zero to be behind the Wildcat in front of me, so I fly this way. But as I get closer I can see that the Wildcat is already going down and I can't see the attacker. So again I pull back up, but as I do so I can see a Zero coming in from the side, and I try to get the nose back down to dive away. But I'm not quite fast enough and I take a hit, and then the plane spins out of control. So this is it for me in this battle, not ultimately successful, but I think it had some nice moments. Well then, let's take a look at some footage in the P-40 in the Pearl Harbor event. Now this event I already had in a video in the past, and in this event US team consisting of P-40s, P-36 as well as a few dive bombers and Catalinas have to take off and intercept a wave of AI dive bombers, while the Japanese Zeros escort them. Now those AI bombers are in my opinion what makes this event somewhat difficult for the US side to win, simply because they split up the US team, and this is exactly what you don't want in those events. You have a good half of the US team focus on the AI dive bombers, so you have a lot less US fighters actually trying to shoot down Zeros, which in turn have a way easier time dealing with the divided US team. The Stalingrad counter-attack event we had recently had a similar problem in my opinion. Now the P-40, unlike the Wildcat, does have a few advantages over the Zero, especially since we got the E to stand in for the B model we don't have in game yet. The P-40 is a bit faster, and it can outdive a Zero a lot easier than the Wildcat can, and its roll rate is also better, which can help to drag out the chase long enough for help to arrive if you have a Zero directly behind you. The P-40 has also a better visibility from the cockpit than the Wildcat, especially to the rear. On the negative side, the P-40 is a lot more unstable when aiming, so it's harder to get a good burst on target with the P-40 than it is with the Wildcat. And of course the P-40 has a higher wing loading and won't turn as well as the Wildcat, though versus Zeros that does not matter so much as you don't want to turn with them anyway. The Zero of course turns much better and climbs better and has an insane energy retention. So similar to the Wildcat, you want to attack with an energy advantage and you want to stay close to your team for mutual support. The P-40 has the advantage however that it can easily outdive and then outrun a Zero if it has some altitude to play with. Well then, let's take a look at the battle in the P-40. Now what I usually like to do in this event after takeoff is to climb either to the left or the right and get above the friendlies that are attacking the AI bombers to support them if possible. But since they arrive pretty quickly, there is not much time to do that though, so you just have to take the risk that a few Zeros climb higher than you. If you waste too much time climbing, the whole thing is going to be over before you can do any good. In this case I climbed away to my left after takeoff and swung around back towards the base to hopefully time it with the arrival of most of the enemy team. There is a lot of friendly AA coming from the ships, and they help with pinpointing the rough location of enemy planes, but since there is so much AAA, it sometimes hides enemy planes more than it shows their location. I know there have to be enemy planes in front of me because of all the AA fire, but I can't spot one right away. But after I get a little bit closer, I can spot a Zero between the AA explosions. He's moving in front of me from my right to my left, and I try to go after him. As I get closer though, the Zero pulls up as it attacks another P-40 going the other way, and I don't get a good shot. So as always I use the speed I have built up in the shallow dive, and I pull up to gain altitude and loop around to hopefully be able to attack from above. Pulling up like this, the P-40 manages to get quite a bit of altitude back, and as I loop around and dive back down, I can spot a Zero passing below me which I can attack. I don't know if it is the one I saw earlier, but at this point it presents a very good target to attack. Now here you can see one of the downsides of the P-40, its very unstable aim. My Pippa oscillates almost the entire width of the Zero, and it's very hard to focus your fire on one part of the plane. The Wildcat definitely has the edge in this department. Nonetheless, I managed to get enough hits to hit the fuel tank and light the Zero on fire, at least for a moment. I'm not sure if I inflicted enough damage to the Zero that it will go down, but I expect he is at least out of the fight for now, and I of course don't want to follow him down to make sure. That would be a waste of altitude at this stage of the battle. Now, after regaining some height, I look for more targets. At this point the AI bombers are coming in, and I can see a few friendly fighters attacking them, but I can't see a Zero at this point. I go into a bit of a shallow dive behind the AI bombers, building up speed and looking for a target. I hope that if a Zero comes in to attack one of the P-40s, I can get behind him from this position. No luck at first, but as I fly past the bombers and look around, I can see some of the trademark orange traces behind me, and I come around to fly that way. But as I do so, I can see a Zero closer to me passing below me, which presents a good target. He turns pretty tight, so I line up my gun sight and fire, hoping to get a few hits in as he passes through my sight. And I do get a few hits, but nothing major, so I go back up again. As I look back, I can see the Zero still turning right below me, and there's a second one too. As I loop around, I simply choose the one as target that is closest to me when my nose is pointing down again. So after I finish my loop and I get the nose back down, I start diving towards the Zero that was just passing below me at this point. Now, the Zero does not seem to be aware of my approach, so I can close into fire range from behind. When I'm close enough, I fire a burst into the Zero and set it on fire, but it also rolls out of my line of fire quickly. Again, I don't want to try to follow down, so I start to pull up again, but as I check my rear I can see another Zero approaching from behind, and I'm not sure if I have the speed to climb away, so I decide to go the safer route and dive away towards the base. While I was not very high when I started the dive, the P-40 can build up a lot of speed pretty fast once you point the nose down, so I'm soon fast enough to outrun the Zero. And I can see two other Zeros attacking a P-40 in front of me, and I try to line up a shot on them as I fly past them, but I'm too fast to get a good shot on any of them. Well, after I'm past them I check my rear and I can't see anyone following me, so I point the nose back up and turn the speed back into altitude. I hope I can attack one of those Zeros I just saw when I flew past the base low level, and as I loop around I can already see some orange traces above the island, so I fly in that general direction. But with all the AA fire and AI bombers flying around as well, it is not that easy to make out targets. Especially since the AI-controlled well-dive bombers from a distance look similar to a Zero. But as I get closer I can see one P-40 and two Zeros in front of me. The P-40 is turning sharply after a Zero, and the second Zero is turning after this P-40. I try to line up a shot on the Zero as I fly past, but I don't get a hit. Now I pull up again, but with the P-40 under pressure this close to me, I don't want to climb too much. I want to come around for an attack as soon as possible, because I want to get the Zero off this P-40's tail. So I come around in a wide barrel roll and go after the two. Here I have some trouble with the unstable aim of the P-40 again though, especially at lower speeds, and after maneuvering it's hard to line up shots, so I don't manage to get a hit. Now usually after such an attack I would pull up and gain altitude, but again I want to get the Zero off the P-40, so I keep attacking right away, even though that costs me a lot of energy. And after a few more bursts I eventually get a good hit and take out the Zero. But as I look back I can see another Zero coming in from behind, and now I am low on speed and altitude, so I can't really dive away. However, there's also a P-36 behind me going after the Zero, so I try to use the roll rate of the P-40 to make myself a more difficult target, while at the same time hopefully making it easier for the P-36 to get the Zero. And indeed, after a very short chase, the P-36 gets the Zero, and I fly away over the base, trying to regain some altitude after that. Now here I make a mistake though. As I am now very low and not very fast, I should take some time to continue in a straight line and climb to get back some speed and altitude, and then come back into the fight later with an energy advantage. But as I try to do so, a smoking Zero is passing me, so I figure that might be a good opportunity to attack him, so I come around a lot sooner than I should have to attack this Zero. The Smoking Zero is slowly turning around and is coming my way, and I do get a hit as he passes me, but as I look back I can see that another Zero is now behind me, and as previously mentioned, I now do not have the speed or altitude to get away. I try to use what little altitude I have to build up speed and get away low level, but I soon noticed that I don't have the speed to do it. Without enough altitude I just could not build up the necessary speed, so after the bridge I pull up hoping the Zeros might have broken off, but no such luck there. Now there's only one more thing to try. Since they are very close behind me, I try to pull up and throttle back and then drop flaps to force an overshoot. But I pull a bit too hard as I try to do so and stall the plane, which enters a flat spin and I don't have the altitude to recover. So this is it for this fight. As you can see, the P-40 is very capable as long as you keep your speed and energy up, but you should not make the mistake of wasting your energy low level, as this leaves you with very little options. Well, and this is it for this video. As always, I hope this was enjoyable, thanks for watching and maybe I'll see you next time.